they are sorting things out in that direction. I think they will be naturally part of the continental free trade area because of the sense it makes, and it makes that sense to Nigeria as well, and especially given the benefits and the impact it would have on Nigeria, but also Nigeria impacting the economy of the continent. The facts are very obvious. I think we are getting there.
Are you talking with President Buhari at the moment? Are we close?
Not at the moment, but we were talking with President Buhari in the build-up to where we are now. And I think that is as significant as talking to him now.
Madam President, Ethiopia has recently signed, which of course is a very big move to making this happen. And it's interesting because when we look at Ethiopia, we know that a lot of trade tariffs have protected local industry. And here you are moving against what we've seen as a trend coming through in Ethiopia. Tell me about the thinking behind signing this and what you're hoping to achieve.
No, thank you very much. I mean, I'm really happy to be here today, just a few days after the ratification by our parliament. I wish we were the 22nd and it would have heralded the beginning of this great project that we have. In Ethiopia is a good example because, in our history, we belong to many economic groupings, but in some areas we were there, but not fully there. So compliance with some rules and so on has been very difficult. But we have also understood that there is no other alternative than integration. It's not only with the CFTA. The recent past would show you that in normalizing our relationship with our immediate neighbors, especially the northern neighbor Eritrea, opened the door to a better integration of the region, a bigger, stable region that we can have. So I think we have seen our responsibility in that, and I don't think that there is no other alternative than going back to our fundamentals, which is the economic integration of the continent.
Fantastic. Mr. Leweru, if you could just give me an indication of what the IFC plans to do in terms of a player. You currently have work around 30 markets at any one time in Africa, and I know you want to get into the smaller countries because you're mostly in the likes of South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya. I know your problems usually are about reforms, about regulation, about policy, and that's, of course, a big hindrance. But you've also been able to assist a lot of countries in getting those things right. What role will the IFC play?
Well, as part of the new strategy that I tried to lay out, I mean, we need to become much more proactive, and which means upstream. Upstream means more than before. We always worked with governments, but frankly, we were a little bit, it was kind of first work with the existing private sector, and then the government, but it was like a second. Now, if you want to really create opportunities, create is a dynamic word. It's not reactive as a pure financier, but work as a partner. We need to work upstream. That's a shift about mindset, to use the word of the president, which is very important. And that means engaging. We have a new product that is called country private sector diagnostic that we do. Our ambition is to do that in every country to see where are these opportunities, where are the changes that will trigger the opportunity.
Are opportunities increasing? And are you seeing those countries, those numbers increasing?
Well, we are working on it. So far, we are at the 3 billion. We want to go to 10. It's not going to happen by itself. So we're starting. I gave one example. We have an example that we're working on right here, since we're in Rwanda, to create a whole mortgage market. That doesn't exist. Creating it, supply and demand. That means working with the government, working with the private sector, working with our colleagues on the World Bank. So that's the ambition. And we believe we can move and move very fast. And working more closely with our colleagues from the World Bank. We're part of the World Bank group. Work with them much more closely. And that's what we have done. And we can unlock possibility that didn't exist before. That's the key.
Mr. Sawiri, so I know you've got operations in West Africa, mining operations. Of course, your main market being Egypt, but you have a large footprint and you understand different markets. How is this going to be a game changer for you, and are you on board when you see the CFTA and the policy that it's going to bring?
I think, as the President Kagame correctly said, the challenges are going to be in the implementation. I mean, you know, when government signs something and then we need to go and then deal with the bureaucrats that have to implement these big agreements, then the problems start, you know. But the significant change here in this approach of the IFC, which I really welcome, is that when we as private sector reach out to governments, there's always this suspicious, you know, that governments are suspicious that we are here just to come and take some money and make some money and run. This is suspicious to the entrepreneur, you know, that he has bad intentions. But the intentions are not bad. He wants to make profit, make money, but make the country also richer and create jobs and give. It's not just take, you know. So having the IFC, let's say, iron the road or become an active player, which means prepare. Let's say I'm an investor here, I'm in diversified. So I'm in mining, in real estate, I'm in financial institutions, IT, telecom. So let's say I come here in Rwanda and I want to invest in real estate, and there is no mortgage program. So how I will sell my units that I'll build, you know. But if the program has been created and the IFC has prepared the ground and all what I need is to come and build and sell the units, I'm in business.
Exactly, and that's an interesting point, Mr. Lopez. When you think about businesses wanting to go into other territories, the things that they think about, the ease of doing business, how long it's going to take to start a business, you know, the tax structures there, and of course, any kind of institutions to make sure that if things go wrong, someone's going to enforce the law. But that said, intra-Africa trade has been increasing as well. And there's a reason why it's still so low. Are we going to be able to get rid of those problems through just one policy? I know it's going to take coordinated action, but what is your prognosis on the matter?
Well, to start with, right now, just two of the largest intra-African investors, South Africa and Morocco, create more jobs with their investments than India, the UK, and Germany combined.
Yeah.
So we have basically a different pattern when you have an intra-African investor. We also have another very important indication that the intra-Africa trade is basically on value addition, whereas the Africa trade with the rest of the world is mostly commodity driven. So we need the value addition. And there is a reason for it. It's because you constitute value chains when you do this type of investments. But of course, the challenge of implementation. Let's just give one example. It takes up to 700 hours to process documentation in some African borders. It costs about $2,500 a day to process documentation for import and export in some countries. So this is unacceptable. We have issues of trade facilitation, but we also have issues of just logistics. The logistics of exporting from Africa to another African country is really brutal. It costs more to get the goods to Mombasa from here than it costs from Mombasa to China.
Wow.
And this is just not possible to continue. So those are the possibilities that the CFTA is going to address if we do things right. But to do things right, there are lots of negotiations that have to take place. Right now, we have agreements in most of the protocols for trade and goods, but we have huge problems to address, such as intellectual property, such as rules of origin, such as how we are going to deal with the mammoth task of basically having the tariff schedules all coordinated and synchronized in a time frame that is not going to be penalizing the momentum that has been created by these fast ratifications. And right now, we have basically 50% more costs in doing trade in Africa than we do in East Asia. And to change that, we'll have to be able to really have more than just political will. We need a lot of technicality too.
What is it going to take?
Well, I think what we have witnessed so far is that, you know, we got just about 2 years of negotiations to get to the agreement. It was signed a year ago. Here we are, 52 adherents, 21 ratifications. If we compare it with any other common approach of negotiations of this scale, and this is the largest, so we don't have a comparator, but of this scale, such as the European Union and others, it took, in average, about 10 years more. So we are not doing bad.
That sounds really good, but we have a problem, Mr. Rabiu. Your president hasn't signed as yet. Has the government engaged with the private sector, and does the private sector want to be part of the CFTA?
Yes, thank you, Eleni. But let me say a few words, about the CFTA before I answer your question.
Yeah.
To also buttress, what His Excellency Paul Kagame has said, CFTA is very important, and it is a very important agreement. And I think, all of us in Africa, need the CFTA. It is something that, can actually help, drive and push the post-2015 Africa Development Agenda as well as the 2063 agenda. So it is a good thing. We all know that. The benefits are there. We know the benefits also, from agriculture to food production, manufacturing to mining, financial services, IT, and also, more importantly, in this case, is the fact that, free movement of people, ease of doing business. And as we all know, less than 25% of Africans actually travel to other parts of Africa. So free movement of people is very, very important. And as far as I know, there are only 2 countries in Africa, Seychelles and Rwanda now, that have free access, to all Africans. Your Excellency, thank you so much for your vision and leadership. So we actually need, to have this. It is a very important thing. However, the structure as it is really does not favor some countries in Africa, like Nigeria, which has not signed. And that is because I believe of the huge population and also the, high dependence on imports. Nigeria has not signed, although I'm not talking on behalf of the government of Nigeria, but I would say this because I know Mr. President has set up a committee, to look into this. And one of the issues is that there is a regional, agreement, block agreement, economic block agreement in West Africa, which is the ETLS, Economic, ECOWAS Trade Liberalization Scheme, which has been in, effect for quite some time. And some of the members are actually not just respecting that. We have a situation in Nigeria where a lot of, companies are actually, producing goods, but they cannot import to, for example, Benin Republic. As a cement manufacturer, I have a cement plant in Nigeria, which is just about, maybe 200 to 300 kilometers away from Benin Republic. We cannot, even though Burkina Faso and, Benin Republic and Niger and Chad, they are all members of this ETLS. So the experience and the lessons learned are what is making Nigeria very wary. That, look, we have an agreement here, an arrangement is not being respected. How are we sure even the CFTA, big one, is going to work? And that is one. And then secondly, also the fact that Nigeria, with its huge population, over 200 million people, the biggest in Africa, and, having, dependence on imports, most of the time, we are worried also because if we allow, this CFTA, of course it is, it is something that is being discussed, and I'm sure at the end of the day, maybe it will be achieved. But then again, the concern is that what about dumping? What if, for example, these borders are opened? Nigeria is a big country. We import a lot of these goods. If some of these smaller countries are importing, things, say from other nations like China and what have you, and then dumping into Nigeria.
So dumping and then the former, the current trade pacts are not as effective.
Exactly.
Those are the two issues.
This is though my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm not talking on behalf of the government of Nigeria. So.
Let me get commentary from President Kagame. So these are really important issues. We know that various trading blocs haven't been as successful as they should have been, even though the EAC is a beacon of hope, perhaps. Dumping is another big issue. Looking at the CFTA, how is it going to ensure that we can firstly make this trade pact work, and then secondly, do away with any problems on dumping?
For more details, we can rely on expertise with some people here like Carlos and others, but I say what I also understand. You see, indeed, like those other arrangements, CFTA does not solve problems per se until people make it work.
Yeah.
So what doesn't make work the other arrangements will also affect CFTA. But CFTA is there so that those areas and people where things have worked, it's continued progress. Now, so we shouldn't hold on to the CFTA and say it won't work just because something else has not worked, because it has worked in some places and for some people. So let's continue forward so that for those it is not working, we can also, or they can also be brought on board, and they need to attend to some of those things affecting them so that they realize the benefits that are there to be realized. So I think we don't expect to put a mechanism or something in place and just expect it to work. No, it needs an effort. People will have to do or to undertake certain things so that things work for them. What is not being questioned here is the benefit of those other organizations, whether they are sub-regional or otherwise, or the CFTA. There is no question. Nobody is saying that this is not the right way to go. Nobody is saying that this is not going to give us benefits. Actually, it is the only way to go if you want to maximize on the benefits and opportunities and for the development of our continent. So we just have to make it work. And we know how to make it work. But we are also aware of the challenges that have to be dealt with.
There's got to be political will as well, right? And that's really important.
Political will is in everything. Yes, Carlos mentioned a while ago about technical aspects of doing things. This is real, this is a must. But political will allows things that must work to work. This is the whole thing. Political will must come first. Yes.
Madam President, Ethiopia is one of the fastest growing economies on the continent. It's all for low-based, many people say, but you're starting to see movement on the manufacturing side of things. Agriculture is doing much better. There's also something that people are concerned about regarding the CFTA, and that being that the stronger economies with stronger value chains are going to cannibalize the smaller economies or economies that have weaker manufacturing bases. How are you thinking about this going into the CFTA, and is it a worry for you?
Well, as said, there are many challenges that we need to discuss. CFTA has given, well, I'll repeat what President Kagame has said. I'm not an expert in that, nor am I an economist, but I know where we should be heading to. And there is no future for a prosperous Africa, which is at the origin of all what we did, if we don't go through it. But nevertheless, it has a lot of challenges, and that's what we are going to start addressing. It gives the framework, but not the details of what should be done. We need to have our national policies in terms of implementing it, but there are best practices. I have been following in my previous life the East African community. There were fears, and under the control of President Kagame, that some countries will lose in terms of revenue, and they have created a fund to address it. But to my knowledge, they have not accessed the fund, which means some of the fears have been overcome in the process. So I think we can learn a lot. If we see the glass half full, and there is no other alternative than going that way, if we want to change the narrative about this continent. The creation of the AU, there was the same debate. People didn't believe that it would address the issues of Africans. But I think it did. So we are at the same stage, and we need to give full confidence and credit to what we are doing, and that way I think we can move. But this is not in any way to undermine the challenges or the losses that we can have, but the wins.
It's going to be net positive, right?
Yep.
Mr. Sawiris, we need infrastructure. I mean, CEOs in this room are going to say, great, you've got this policy, you want to do away with the 700 hours that it takes to cross the border with goods, but how are you going to get the goods there? So who's going to build the infrastructure? Who's going to pay for it? And is the private sector keen to get involved?
I think the private sector will be waiting when it comes to infrastructure, because first of all, it is a very large and massive amounts. And then the returns are long and are not very clearly to determine. How are you going to get your money back if you, let's take a country like South of Sudan. It's a new country, so they don't have a single paved road. And they cannot transport anything they manufacture or agriculture. They have to import everything just because they don't have the road. So I think this is a task of the World Bank when IFC said they'll work with other institutions. And I hope also that the World Bank and IFC and others will reform themselves too, because the bureaucracy cycle.
This is what I want to say. To get money from the World Bank or the IFC needs a lot of work
my
and
personal
time.
experience with the World Bank and IFC, this was a long time ago, so don't be. Was horrible. They take 2 years to decide on any project. So if it's an infrastructure project, I think it has to come first from the World Bank with a massive financing. It has to be approved and ready to go, and then we can come in. We can come in with equity, we can come in with the execution, we can bring our construction companies and execute. But the private sector is, as the IFC too is savvy when they invest, we are also savvy when we invest. We need to see the returns, and infrastructure is a long term, and most probably it has to be done either by governments or by the new invaders like China and the others,
Well, yes, sir. Please comment on this. And I feel like we're having deja vu because I keep asking the World Bank and the IFC when you're going to do things quicker.
Takes two to tango.
So what do you need?
I think that I have to disagree partly with what you say, because more and more in the world you see, in fact, privately finance and manage infrastructure. Now, is it true for all infrastructure? No. So you have to be clear what infrastructure can be commercialized where you need a profit, which means a return, a flow of money. Why should an extension of an airport add public debt when it should be a source of revenues for the government? Why should a port be done by increasing public debt, which is pretty high in many countries already? Why do a telecom system be done by increasing public debt when the private sector can make a lot of money? Why do a solar plant be done by the public sector when we can do it on the private sector, etc., etc.? So I think even in the, I know you want to go to the time questions, how fast we are, but I think the world has evolved. When I was young, telecom was taught as a natural monopoly. Now, if you say that now to a class of economy students, they laugh at you.
Yeah.
The world has changed. And now you have private sector solution, including for some, not all. If you want rural roads, there's no private sector solution.
Yeah.
If you want, I don't know, waste, some of it can be private, but not all. So it's more subtle than, all infrastructure is public or all this is private.
I'm cognizant of time, so I want to go to Mr. Rabio. I know that you're in ports, you're in cement, you're in all sorts of things, and you're still in Nigeria. Why haven't you expanded? And are you thinking of expanding, and would you help with the infrastructure build? What do you need to make that happen?
Well, yes. Nigeria is a very interesting country because, as we all know, it's the biggest, economy and is in a big market. And as it is today, we still have quite a lot to do. And of course, there are quite a lot of opportunities outside Nigeria. But I think if I can talk on the issue of infrastructure that you just mentioned, I think it is key, for us to actually, have this, because the governments, private sector, policymakers, decision makers must all come together, especially also with the DFIs, to try and improve on the infrastructure in Africa, because really we need to do quite a lot. I mean, if you look at the Trans-African Highway, which was envisioned, way back in the 70s, nothing has really been achieved.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think the private sector can actually, assist, by sitting down and see how we can, as Mr. Swari said, see how we can partner with the governments and DFIs. Look at, other countries. Everybody is doing, quite a lot of things are happening all over the world. Africa needs to move on. We can actually start even with this Trans-African Highway. There are about 9 highways. I mean, think of Lagos-Mombasa, the Highway 8, which is something that I think, if we can get, construction companies and cement manufacturers, steel companies from Africa, sit down and talk to them and see what we can do. I'm sure quite a number of us would be more than willing to actually partner without necessarily, having to sell, at high price. I'm not trying to market my cement now. I'm just trying to make a point, I mean, like we can look at maybe tolling or maybe deferred payment over time. And this is something that is important. If we're able to link West Africa and East Africa, which is about 6,000 kilometers, it would be quite interesting, then it would even help, our businesses. So I think the issue of infrastructure is key, because even with the CFTA, even if we're able to get it, which I'm sure we will at the end of the day, but without proper infrastructure, it will not make a lot of sense.
Fantastic. President Kagame, the busiest port between Uganda and Rwanda is currently under construction, so it's been closed. And we've actually seen the impact of businesses saying, well, we can't get trucks through and so forth. So this is a big question that a lot of people have been asking. Is there anything we need to worry about between Uganda and Rwanda? Can you clarify for us? Because we were talking about having political will having political will with your neighbors is going to be of paramount importance.
Absolutely. I think that explains the point in the sense that
Really?
behind that, you have for example, we have hundreds of people from Rwanda, arrested, detained in prison for months, for years, in Uganda, without being charged, without appearing anywhere in court. They are piling up in prisons. Now, which means the message is, don't go to Uganda. It's like Uganda is telling Rwandans, don't come here. We have raised this issue for the last 2 years with the Ugandan government. We said, if you have people who have committed crimes in Uganda, who have come from Rwanda, or who are coming there to commit crimes, deal with that legally. Deal with that openly. At least that's minimum. You can imagine, not only have they not been treated through the legal process, they have not even been given consular access. Even ambassadors, diplomats cannot go to visit these people because some of them are locked up in places that are not known. We have engaged with Uganda for the last 2 years talking about that, but we are getting nowhere. We've brought it up with many of our friends who have talked to all of us. It doesn't lead us anywhere. So, but let me not stay on that. So that's one part. The other part, I'm sure maybe some of the business people who were affected are in this room. We had containers leaving Kigali, going to Mombasa. You have to go through Uganda. If you're going to Mombasa, we have, actually, the irony here is that both of us are landlocked. Uganda is landlocked, we are landlocked. But for us, when it is that route, we face double the problem of being landlocked because Uganda landlocks us. The containers of minerals that were leaving Rwanda, going through Mombasa, were held in Uganda for 5 months. Wow. And when we were asking, first of all, we checked here, the revenue people and others had cleared the containers. They contacted their counterparts in Uganda. They actually told them there is nothing. They have cleared them. Then you say, why are they being held? You say, no, messages came from somewhere, and they said, no, they should not go. This is an investor, a foreign investor. He's not even a Rwandan. He's a company from Germany. And then there were people from Kenya who were importing milk from Rwanda. I think they were buying milk all the way from Rwanda, from Uganda for processing. I think they have huge capacity. And the containers from here were held in Uganda for days until tens of thousands of liters were spoiled. And we've been bringing up this. No. So that is the background. But for what is happening at the border, we have 3 border points that connect us with Uganda or through Uganda. It is only one that actually is not working to the full capacity. Maybe it is at about 20–30% because of that construction that is being talked about. And we hope that in the next few weeks, maybe not even months, that should be working. So when this happened, at the time there was this other problem taking place, then it grew up into a much bigger problem. And so this is where we are. So politics is what is behind it rather than actually anything else.
Thank you for being so open with us, President Kagame. And this is very interesting because you've got, politics getting involved in an economic, standoff perhaps. I mean, is there retaliation that is happening, do you think, at the borders? I mean, you were talking about containers being held. And then when you see this as an example of what could possibly play out, if there isn't political will with your neighbors or even regionally, it's an example of how things can go wrong within a trade agreement, correct?
Yeah, that's going to be there. It has to be attended to. I'll give many examples. When we had actually the actual meeting, the CFTA summit here, those who followed the news, 2 days after I went to Uganda, I was visiting Uganda, and you know what had taken me there? It is actually to address this particular program I was talking about. I went to see the head of state, the president of Uganda, to say, what is this? Why is this happening? And I actually had the opportunity to brief the leadership there, the matters as were discussed in the summit. I said, you see, there are big things here being discussed underway, but the 2 countries are caught up in these things that we can't even justify. So why don't we work together to get rid of this so that we even benefit from this big thing that is being discussed at the continental level? That was the reason I was visiting the country. But there are things I can't explain that keep happening.
Thank you, President Kagame. Madam President, tell me about the sectors that you're most excited about. And I'm actually glad that we mentioned the political will because that's going to be important. Tanzania hasn't signed yet either. Tell me about how you see things regionally. I mean, you mentioned Eritrea earlier, which of course is a fantastic example of how change can occur. Are there any sectors specifically that you're excited about? And tell me about the vision that you have for the fastest growing economy on the continent.
Yeah, well, the ambition that we have is to maintain that growth, of course, which has been there for the last decade, but for also have, building the new Ethiopia on that basis. But as I have said earlier, the reality is that there is a limit to whatever you can do when you are limited within your national borders, which borders have been inherited, artificial as far as Africa is concerned. If we have in our constitutive act that we abide to the colonial borders, not because we like it, it's because there was no other alternative, but we know that it is obviously artificial. So moving forward, I think in whatever we do, and especially when we have these challenges nowadays that knows no border, no frontier, that doesn't have any passport to cross from one to the other, I think the coming together is really fundamental. So for Ethiopia, what is interesting is as much as we concentrate in the local and domestic politics, because it's a new era that we have entered into, we have the same bold vision for the region. And that region has been lagging behind as when you compare it to West Africa and even the East African communities that I have mentioned earlier. The Horn of Africa and that part of the continent should be in a position to move faster. I think there is a good opportunity because for some, or many of them, we have been into crisis, peace and stability, and this is being overcome, and that's very, very important. And also it shows that we have to go that way in order to precisely address the issues of peace and security as well. So development will be the best venue.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, we've run out of time. I just want to give one last word to President Kagame as we kick off the rest of the discussions. What do you hope to achieve out of this forum and hope to see from the private sector?
Well, first of all, this forum does us proud as Africans. I want to start from there. I think it brings us together to know where we are coming from, where we stand today, and where we should be going in the near future, and what needs to be done. And really there is a lot of knowledge, expertise, and political will, if you will, also in this room, that if we harnessed it, if we worked hard at it all together, I think Africa would be where we need to be. So I think this is the first thing that I can talk about, and I'm sure the rest is what we are all able to do and willing to do, and together again, I think Africa has immense, unlimited opportunity and even a capacity in terms of knowledge, expertise. These young Africans, unfortunately, they are doing wonderful things for other continents, for other people. We should be doing that for ourselves as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, President Kagame, and of course, Madam President as well, for being with us today, and of course the rest of our panelists. Unfortunately, we did have to cut it short because we ran over time. We are still over time, so we would like for you to break for a networking session.